G'day, I'm Pete Hughes and you clicked on the Reach Australia podcast. This is the last of 4 sessions on multi-site church planting. I hope that you've had a chance to listen to the previous 3. This one is particularly a Q&A session with Wade Burnett, our international expert on multi-site church planting, and Paul and Sue Harrington as leaders of the Trinity Church Planting Network. Hope you enjoy.
Okay, I'm going to kick it off just with a question that I think I'm actually going to drag Scott up for as well, because I'm going to ask the question, and Wade touched on it before, but it is a conversation that we're having more and more, and I think Matt raised it before around mergers of churches and what that looks like and how it is. Scott, I might get you to kick off. The question issue is how does multi-site fit with mergers? How do we think about that? Can you add 2 dead churches together and get a live church? Is that how resuscitation works? And how just denominational leaders and church leaders, how are you thinking of this area?
Okay, so two questions there. There's been a lot more conversations being started with us with a church's approaches to merge, and I think our experience of mergers in Australia is what Jim Tomerlane in his book Better Together calls an ICU merger. So you've got 2 dead or dying churches come together and they drown faster or maybe drown a little bit slower. And I think most of us just go, okay, it's a bad thing. The model that Jim has seen as in some sense a lane in the multi-site world where a church is dying and they approach a church that's got momentum. People may not have property, but may have a growth trajectory that they don't have, is the one that we're exploring more and more with churches where a church is getting into that life preservation stage and saying, hey, we want to do something, we want to steward these resources well. And so I often describe it as it's just described in Jim Tomerlane's book as a bit of a marriage and a dance. And so the courting phase and then the engagement phase and then the marriage phase and then the honeymoon period and then the post-honeymoon period. But that's a really good conversation to kind of be exploring and pushing into, because often what flows out of that is a multi-site church, 1 church in 2 locations. But the really healthy thing about engaging this in a strategic way is actually hopefully to do what Jim calls, I guess, merger math or good merger maths, which is 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, but actually equals 5 or equals 10. And so how we've been approaching it is as an opportunity actually to reach a region far better, but also to see the stewardship of God's resources far better. I know Trinity Networks, experienced that with Lockleys and Des Smith with a Bretho church. Is that right? Or Christian Community Church or Brett? Yeah. Not Des, but someone in the Trinity Network. And we've worked with a number of churches now where we've helped them sort of manage that conversation and move towards merging well, so that they can actually launch a lot stronger.
Great. Go away from me. Last time it squealed.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
Yeah. I try to save all your ears. I'll just say a couple of things about mergers. If you're a growing church, this is the most cost-effective way to find a new facility. It's so cost-effective that one category of merger is called mercenary mergers. I don't recommend those, but we've been contacted a number of times to serve as a kind of facilitator of the merger conversation, because if you remember this morning, we have 300,000 churches that are on the whole declining. And so that means there are lots of empty church buildings and other resources around the country where I live. So what you're looking at, or maybe what you're looking for, is a church with vision and some great leadership who needs space and then a church with space that needs some vision and some leadership. And you're starting to ask the question of, can you put those two things together? And my answer to that, if I'm asked, can you put those two things together, I always say yes, but not easily. And so here's how we evaluate putting them together. In every mission-driven merger, that's the category we're talking about now, there is a lead church and a joining church. And this has nothing to do with size. This has everything to do with who is bringing the leadership and the vision to this conversation. It has nothing to do with the buildings or the wealth of the respective congregations or the resources that might be in the bank accounts. Again, you're looking at who has leadership and vision and is bringing that to the conversation. This is what was proposed to me as a young pastor. A joining church asked if we would consider merging. But one of the reasons I called Jim Tomberlin was they had a really beautiful facility and money in the bank, and felt like we would be coming into this 50-50. And the 50% that I was evaluating, I didn't feel as strongly about as they did. Y'all with me? I didn't feel as positively about it. And so one of the things that Jim shared with me, and again, I would recommend the book that Scott read. If you're leading a mission-driven, high-vision, great leadership church, you're very likely to have one of these conversations over the next 10 years, where you or the denomination you work in asks, would you consider an adoption? And your first step, if you do that, I would recommend is to read the book Better Together, which has this dynamic set forth in there of a mission-driven merger. And this really is the only kind of merger, if I'm just making a blanket statement, that I would recommend. And so I'm going to use a little Americanized language here. I want to make this point as directly and as quickly as I can. In the merger, it's not that each church brings 50% and we compromise together. In the merger, this church wins. Okay? I want to make y'all uncomfortable when I say that. This church wins. So if this church says we're open to a merger, but we want to make sure that we have a 1:15 service, because we've always had a 1:15 service, and that's a condition of ours in doing this merger. But you guys, as great leaders, are leading this church. What do you say to them about the 1:15 service? Yeah, we're not doing that. We don't do that at our church. Well, maybe you do, and that's a great thing, but I'm trying to pick a time that, you wouldn't normally do. Maybe it's a 7 a.m. service. Let's go with that one. You don't look like early morning people to me. Yes, there we go. So y'all getting I'll use an Australian word, the vibe of this? They're going to want things their way, and that's not actually best on the whole. It's best on the whole for the church that has leadership and health and vision and momentum to bring those things to the merger without any conditions. And that's what a mission-driven merger is. A lot of those won't work the first time through, because this church will be asked to change in some ways that they may not be ready to change. And that's where a guide like Reach Australia or Derek or Scott, to personalize it even more, can be really, really helpful, because the choices on that are often continued decline, or we can actually do something together. That's the reason for the book, that gives a very different path forward. But there are some very hard changes in that, and some very hard conversations that also have to happen in that for the lead church to actually lead through the merger. And a guide can be very, very helpful. So not if, but when you're approached about one of those, buy the book Better Together, and then call Derek or Scott and ask them to facilitate these hard conversations.
Well, can you get Paul, because this has happened in the Trinity Network recently. Can you just describe what that process was like?
Yep, sure. So over the years, we've been approached lots of times to sort of do mergers with other churches. What that normally sounds like is, can you please send us 50 people for our church? Because we're having problems. And we never normally get much beyond that. But recently there was a Reformed church. So you you won't remember. We planted a church in Campbelltown 2022, and there was a church in Campbelltown, a Reformed church, and they approached us. We said, we hear you're about to plant a church. Could we merge together? And then I spoke to every person I spoke to said, that's not going to work. It really won't work for all sorts of different reasons. But the former pastor of that church asked me to catch up with the elders. I did. And I asked them, they said, look, we've been trying to reach our local suburb with the gospel for years. We've been a more Dutch Reformed, South African Reformed. We're a niche sort of group that we don't seem to be connecting evangelistically, and we want to reach our suburb. You guys seem to be doing that. We'd love you to help us do that. And we went through a whole process with them, meeting for about 12 months. And eventually what we did was we put a church planting proposal to them that was them stopping their church, leaving their venue, joining a group from another one of our churches into a new venue to start a new church. Essentially, basically, they were giving everything up. And we figured that putting that proposal to them, they wouldn't do it, and we'd move on. So we turned up to their eldership meeting. They'd read the proposal, and they didn't seem to be saying much. And I thought, they must be really angry. I thought that's where we were. And anyway, we said, so what questions? Oh, no, we don't. We've already discussed this, and we think this is exactly the right thing to do. So they took it to an eldership. They took it to a meeting of their church, the elders, voted on it. 98% of the people said, yep, we should join the Trinity Network and start a new church plant and move out of our building and just sell that. They then said to us, what do you want to do with the money when we sell the building? And we said, you need to work that out. That's your church and your money, and that will be your decision to work out what you do with it. We're not doing this for your building or for your money. We're doing it because we want to start a new church to reach people with the gospel. And they actually eventually sold their building and gave us the money, but we weren't involved in that process at all. We launched on a Sunday. There are a whole stack of people who in that church were thinking, yeah, we've agreed to do this, but now we've got to set up buildings every Sunday. We used to have a building, but their building only held 120 people. And so we wanted to start a church that would get bigger than that fairly quickly. And so on the first Sunday, all the elders came up to me and other people and said, we're so excited to be here with more people than we could have fit into our building, and we see exactly why we needed to do this. And it's been an incredibly successful merger, but it's been because it was mission driven. That was their heart. The decisions we made were around that sort of decision. We said we think it's going to be best for reaching new people. Their building was part of a retirement village, in a fairly backwoods sort of spot, and there were lots of reasons why it just wasn't going to work. But it was because of the godliness of those elders and their conviction, which is why it did work. And I think that's the thing to test. We've done it once because actually it came together, but I think it's pretty hard. And I think repots have always got challenges with them as well for the same sorts of reasons. Yeah.
That's good. Tim's got a question. So I think when we do this, just name, context and question would be good.
Tim Capel, Christchurch, New Zealand. Can you just speak a little bit to the selection of a leader for a multi-site in the context where a church has maybe shifted away from the congregational pastor to a more purpose-led or matrix model of leadership? Does that diminish the importance of getting the right leader for a multi-site because the leadership's more shared?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think this is the one of the inflection points for multi-site with a number of the churches that I've met with here. And when I say met with, I mean like consulted with and been back to over the years. How many of you have some version of like the M's model of ministry? I know y'all use B's in Australia, but okay, see how many hands are up. That's not necessarily a multi-site friendly model. So even working with a church yesterday after their morning services and talking through how things were going, this is the tension point that comes up. And the lead pastor actually said, I feel like we're moving away from a lot of our leadership and influence being in the M's and a lot of our leadership and influence moving toward the campus pastor. And that's a tension. But that was certainly the development there. That shifting kind of importance of different roles at different stages of development is very real, very, very real. And there are a lot that we could speak to. One of them is that executive role that I identified earlier. So I got a chance to meet with Norwest last week as they're evaluating some of these kinds of things, and shared with Pete that, just as I was sharing with all of you, wrestle with the change in your role when you now are partnering with somebody whose significance to this whole approach is going to go up in a lot of ways. And the level of trust and relationship that has to exist there for that to work well is now critical to the model. That's just one other example of how these things can shift.
So my thought would be the scalability of an EMS model across multiple campuses is a bit like Wade was talking about in terms of the ability to run multi-site. That is, the more sites you have, the more complex it gets. I think the way probably to deal with that is to be realistic about going from, say, one church to 2 or 3, the spans of responsibility for M people. I think my gut is probably the best way to do that is by using the M's as a diagnostic model, and rather than trying to have people appointed to M's that work over multiple campuses. I think that it can be done, but it is very complicated because what you're doing, classic matrix model, pastor, M's or vice versa, and then just multiply that over more campuses and you get the problem. You really do stretch the capacity. So, the diagram towards this end, and it's a 9.9 dive. I reckon multi-siting using the same staff across multiple campuses, and you're pushing way up this end. It can be done, but it requires, I think, exceptionally clever people to pull it off. What we've tended to do is still run with a purpose-driven model, but be getting churches to indigenize that in their local context, rather than try and get the M-type people straddling across, like 14 churches. You just can't do it, But what we are, because we're a family of churches, is we'll have people working in certain purposes in some locations that are skilled and can provide consultancy space for other churches to share resources that sort of way. I think just thinking cleverly about how you do it, I think. Your first part of your question was, does it affect who you select as a campus pastor? So I think you're hearing me say, no, that's still really a critical appointment, either for a multi-site or for a church plant. But in the multi-site space, still critical to get the right campus pastor, because they'll have to coordinate those purposes for that location. They need to be the right sort of person, I think. Yeah.
Derek, Heath asked me one at the break that I wanted him to be able to ask here because Paul was weighing in on it a little bit. Sorry, we'll come right back. It just touches on this a little too.
Thanks. So not all of us have somewhere we can launch within 20 minutes radius of us, but in your discussion of maximising location, you really only addressed the AM time slot. So if a church was to try and maximise their location by launching kind of missionarily into a PM time slot, say for a non-Christian audience who play sport on a Sunday morning, but they're the ones that you want to target, do you think that would be more like launching a multi-site or a church plant in your own building?
You were talking about church times, I thought.
Yeah. Look, if you're in the morning and you're full and you think, I know what we'll do, we'll launch an evening gathering, there are a couple of things to bear in mind. The evening is new. Like the reason why people are meeting in the mornings because they want to meet in the morning, they don't want to meet in the evening. And often the group that come in the evening are very different to the morning group. So from our point of view, when some of our churches have gotten full launched in the evening, it's taken no pressure off the morning at all, and the morning should have planted. Like they should have actually bitten the bullet and started something that worked for this sort of group. I'm not saying don't do the evening, not at all, But I'm just saying often it's done with a view to relieving pressure on the morning, but it is highly unusual to achieve that sort of purpose. Trying to reach a new target audience in the evening is a great goal to have, and I'd encourage people to be thinking, about how to do that. But you've almost got to treat the morning, it might be a resource for the evening, but you've got to treat it as its own, its own thing in order to work out where that's going. The other comment that I was talking to Wade about in the break was maximising site space by multiplying to 9 and 11. I think when you've got your own building, that can work pretty well. Our experience is we've tried that numbers of times in buildings that we don't own, and we found the 11 is a real stretch in our context. Now, it might be just Adelaide. We can do 9 for families, that can work. 11 just is stretching it. And I wonder if it's because the American culture is it's still got, especially in some places, more of that church-going DNA on a Sunday morning in their system that means the time is less sensitive when you're pushing towards lunch. But you guys might have a different experience. We've done that several locations. The second one is always the tough one. Our city church, where we own the building, we run 2 AM all-age gatherings, and that works reasonably well. But my guess is if we combine those at 10, it would probably flourish, and maybe if we planted from there, we might actually be better off, to be quite honest. So I think that's a question that we've wrestled with for a while. Yeah.
I would put way more credibility on Paul's take on that than mine. The 9 and 11 from America may not have application here at all. And so, Heath, that's why I wanted to make sure we answered this here so that everybody could hear that and consider that. When I say maximize your facility, that's for you to determine what that looks like. The other part of your question about it being for a unique audience, to me, again, these are just shades, but that shades much more to the church planter type thinking because you're no longer just reproducing what you do in the morning and doing it over again. You're having to think through whole new approaches to reach maybe different groups of people that you aren't reaching in the morning. And so you have to be creative, not necessarily just using the exact same kinds of strategies. And all of these are going to be variations of some of these same tensions. Like John came up to me during the break, they have an evening congregation that's sort of beginning to take off and wondering, what do I do there? So that's why I say these aren't rules. These are principles for you guys to consider as under that heading of what it looks like to maximize your facility. And what I would say for Paul, if I'm looking from the outside, is he feels like it's maximized in the morning when that one strategic service is getting full, because then that allows him to prepare for a plant and they backfill that. That's what they've determined maximizing looks like for them. So don't just assume 9 and 11 is the way to go. Y'all with me? All right, good.
Yeah, thanks. I think I'm Liam, I'm from Morisset. I think I just heard Paul say we're trying a much too hard dive, but we've got a single staff team running a multi-site over 2 locations, 9:30 in the morning and then 4 p.m. in the afternoon, 20 minutes apart. So one thing right.
Yep.
And doing the matrix, the M's across both, so 2 staff. Just wondering, I guess, Wade, is there a stream of multi-site where that might work ever? Is there a stream where you'd share staff across your 20-minute multi-site, and what might that look like?
Yeah, absolutely, there is. I think it would fit within that 80 to 90% that have one location. It's just to Paul's point, when you start elevating the how far you can stretch all of those roles, how many locations and congregations they can get to, the difficulty of the dive goes way up, and I love this word. You have to start thinking cleverly. For us, that has a little like sinister note to it, America. Clever is, and I actually like that. Like you have to think almost coldly about, will this work? To keep stretching that in different directions. So absolutely it can work. And it can especially work for one additional location. And especially when you give it margin across times. I would start to have real questions about that when you start thinking about adding on more, which is where Paul began to stretch the model in new ways. And guys, I just can't stress enough, like when he gives that kind of input as to, like he did for you, Tim, on how to deal with the EMS model, and they've adjusted, and this is one of the best leaders I've been around, whether in Australia or anywhere else. Again, I would just put an enormous amount of stock in not necessarily a solution that you just pull over, but the way he approached it. You have this problem, so we made these adjustments, then we reevaluated this. Those are things that I would weigh heavily.
Liam, I think the difference in time, I'd agree with what I'm particularly thinking about how you get, multi-site, same times, with same staff. And one of the drawbacks with that is you've got staff not being committed to a congregation or only committed to one, or, do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think that's healthy at the end of the day, except in a coaching sort of space rather than a belonging space. Yeah. So, Duncan Andrews over here, who's just joined us, that they're trying exactly the same thing as you guys next year, thinking from the morning congregation, studying something in the evening, using a team to do both things. And I think that's certainly achievable. Yeah.
I just wanted to say about the 9 and 11, maybe possibly not working in Australia. Well, we've done 9 and 10:30 in Wollongong, and very successfully. So there's an idea.
That's
and
really
then
good.
planted a church as well with, how many, Rod? 60 people.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good.
Any strategies? Oh, sorry, Dave from Tuggeranong. Any strategies you found helpful if a church doesn't have planting in its DNA to develop that culture?
Yep, that was us.
How long have it been?
We waited 180 years to do it. So I think we've worn out a few generations not doing it. I can tell you what I did. So as a larger church, I was 34 when I became a senior pastor, the rector, and I remember when it was announced in church, there were two very typically Adelaide responses, right? The first one was 300 or 400 people went, right, when it was announced, and then they immediately applauded, very supportive. The week after, I had a senior member of the congregation come up to me, 70 years old, about a foot taller than me, and sort of looked down on me. He said, "I think the trustees have made a terrible mistake." And he said, "You're far too young, you're far too inexperienced to do this job." Waited for my response, and I said, then he said, "But you'll have my full support." And he left. What I tried to do in that space was take a fair bit of time to help, re-veer the ship in a different direction. And we used a whole lot of things. The internal new congregation kept saying we're full, but Adelaide's spiritually sick. The senior leaders of the church sent me away to get some experience. I went to America, spent time with Wade and people like that. I did a church planting course at Fuller. They invested in that direction. When I came back, people expected we were going to do something. But that was a 5-year development plan, and we're trying to lay some of the foundations. So I think, depending on your context, what does patience look like? Persuasion look like? The convictions that go with it. Why do we want to plant? To reach lost people. I think doing that sort of thing. First church plant, 30% of people thought it was a good idea. 30 were waiting to see what would happen. 30 thought it was dumb. Second one, higher percentage. It wasn't a disaster the first time. And so everyone was saying, "Oh, no, we should give this another shot." Still a group thinking it was dumb. By the time we did it the third time, 2010, everyone was saying, "Oh, that makes sense. We're a church planting church, aren't we?" It's the patiently instructing, training, gathering, doing that sort of work to get to that point. And I can say personally, I'm impatient. So it was hard work taking the time to do it, but I think it was appropriate to do that sort of time. So I think clarity on what you're trying to do, given the congregation you've got and its size, How do you take the steps to get to a point? And don't scare. So I came back from overseas in America and I thought, what do we need in Adelaide? Probably 750 church plants. That's what I thought, But I didn't announce that. I just said, I think we need to plant a church. Now I had in my mind we needed to plant lots of churches, but I started with one. And I think trying to get yourself going, rolling, doing it step by step as you move along. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have really much at all to add. I just would say, to the extent you can, reinforce for the church that doing nothing is not an option. So you're going to do something. Whatever context you're located in, there are people who desperately need to hear the gospel. You're positioned in a unique place in order to be part of that. We're called to accomplish the Great Commission. We're going to do something. And the question is what? And I think when those seeds are planted, it feels like a big stretch, especially when you're sending people out for the first time. It feels like a big stretch. But if they understand that this is what we are doing and doing our part, there can be a little bit of excitement built even there at the beginning.
Hi guys, Josh from the Bridge Church. Just wondering, Paul, you made the comment of playing church, and when you listen to people talk, when one listens to people talk about church planting, there's often different approaches. Like there's an attractional kind of an approach. There's a evangelizing churches into existence. So, starting not public and then going public later. Can you talk about that dynamic with Multisite as well? How do you avoid playing church, and how do you make sure that the new site is actually evangelistic and reaching the lost?
Yep. I think, I'll make a couple of comments because Wade will have more to say about this than me, really. That in COVID, we, with all that density and everything like that, we pushed people off site into a new location, but we weren't church planting. And the new congregation, even post-COVID, we left it in place. But because it started as a solution to a pressure problem with space, it never really had that DNA to do evangelism and that sort of thing. And in fact, we then relocated that congregation to a new spot with a relaunch with clarity on what they were doing. I think with multi-siting, that can be a risk. We're replicating the mother church. Now, if the mother church is healthy evangelistically and you beat that drum for the new location, then you can do it successfully. But there is a risk that we're just doing it as a solution to solve space stuff. So I think Wade commented on the 20-minute rule closer, the challenges with that. And I think that's classically we're solving a space problem solution rather than trying to work out how we're going to reach new people with the gospel. So I think there are a couple of comments, but you'll have more to say about that, mate.
I would affirm all of that. I mean, again, part of the reason, Josh, I shared all we did at the beginning is to again, we're looking at strengths and weaknesses. It's to let you guys have a full look at where this model originated, which was to solve a space problem. And so that DNA is inherent in the model. And I think if a lot of thought's not given to some of the things that you're talking about, it can become just a new way to make church easier for Christians who are already inclined to come to church. You have to work very hard to go against that. That's something Derek, I don't know if you want to speak to this, but he pushed into in a number of the consults I've sat in with him. It's not worth doing if all we do is create a spot for church that's easier for Christians to attend. So Derek, I don't know if you want to talk about the evangelistic approaches of churches as these things are launched. I will say it is established that this is a very effective evangelistic model. It will tend to reach people that you won't otherwise reach from what you're currently doing. But there has to be some intentionality given to that too.
Yeah, very briefly, I think that the studies we've done, even recently, we're seeing no matter the type of church plan, nearly always they reach more people percentage than established churches, nearly always across the board. Doesn't matter the type. We would probably see percentage-wise the parachute pioneer planners reach a higher percentage, and partly that's reflective of the person. But that's not more numbers necessarily either, actually. You start with 5 and you get one conversion, you got 25% or 20% conversion rate. So you're doing pretty well. But it so much depends on the leader in that context. But we would say, if you're not reaching anyone where you are, don't expect to reach anyone when you plan. Just, what makes you think you will. So we want to drill that in. Paul's comment on DNA is good. Now, I've got a question for my phone, then I'll head over there and then down to Chris, if that's all right. So the question on the phone was, I was introduced to the idea recently that disciple-making movements, small group settings that invite outsiders, open the Bible and multiply, are more effective at making disciples than our current models, including church planting, which are resource heavy and takes time. No, we're not doing this question. Sorry, I don't know who did this one. No, it's a joke. We are doing this question. Have you got thoughts? Are there other ways to reach people? Is there a place for both? Even how do we use these disciple-making movements? How does it fit into multi-site? So I think it's a question around the different models, large and small, resource heavy, not resource heavy, maybe pushing to Matt's micro church as well, smaller churches. How do you see these fitting?
You want me to go? Yeah. I think multi-site as a model is a poor place for experimentation. That just would be my overarching response to that. So if you're evaluating some of the kinds of things that were included in that question, disciple-making models that don't rely on all of the expensive things that go with buildings and staff and our current approaches, I would not marry those new kinds of ideas that you're wanting to evaluate to a multi-site launch. I would tend to, in my way of thinking, create some research and development lanes. Does that term translate? Yep. Some freedom within where we currently are operating to go try all of that. A microsite, see if it has traction, with a place that has the ability to respond to whether it actually clicks or not, than I would to marry it to a new launch, whether that's multi-site or church planting.
Yeah, the only thought I'd have to throw in is that whatever the model you're doing in terms of multi-siting, church planting or whatever, you do have to think deliberately about how you're making disciples.
Amen.
All through that, both from evangelism right through to how you're growing people in the gospel, how you're helping them to think about how they develop in service, in ministry. None of that, I think, happens best by accident. So that design work needs to feature. I don't think that design work has historically been a strength of our network. And so the qualitative work of, I think in the evangelism space, we've always worked hard at that. The growing people to maturity and deliberateness in raising up people who serve, we've learned a lot through being a part of the Reach Australia stuff and having that our lens challenged from that point of view, so that we actually think about how in our churches we're doing that more effectively and deliberately. And I think, so wherever you go, like we all want to make disciples, so just be thinking through how you're going to do it in your context is obviously a good thing to do.
I'll take a little risk here and just say that this large model of church that I shared this morning was designed and implemented and resulted in the megachurch, but didn't get widespread adoption here for a lot of different reasons. Some practical and some more related to how you guys see church. That model is, and this is not my opinion, this is data driven, it's actually pretty poorly designed to make disciples. So I just want you to know that. You may in some ways have been protected from a lot of sideways energy that didn't accomplish what we're all supposed to actually be about. And when I say that's data driven, one of the resources that I'd suggest if you're interested in this, checking out is the Reveal study. It's a little dated now, but this is a study that was a survey that was done from every member and regular attender of Willow Creek around their personal spiritual journey with the church and in their walk with Jesus. And what they learned at the end of that study or survey as they assimilated. Now, they did a great thing. They hired somebody external to the church to lead that survey so that it wasn't influenced at all by anyone inside the church, kind of being steered towards saying these are great things that we do. And the outcome at the end of all of that is really kind of, shocking, was they found little to no correlation. Well, let me back up even one step further. They found that the church was excellent at encouraging people to take the steps they were asking them to take. So that's number one. We're really clear about the steps we want to ask you to take, and the church was really good at encouraging people to take those steps. So visit, then membership, then join a group. Y'all with me? Then volunteer. People took those steps. The church was great at that. But at the end, they found there was very little to no correlation between someone taking those steps and actually growing in their walk with Christ. And that gulf between the two was pretty shocking. Little to no correlation is really, really strong language. So that's a question around discipleship models that's been going on in the American church since then. Just wanted you to have that as well. Just in case all of you were inclined to go start a mega church. I just wanted you.
Sorry, I'm just processing what you just said. Jade, Grace City, we are from Sydney, so we planted in Waterloo 10 years ago now, and then I've just planted in Rockdale, so just 15-minute drive, so tick. Also tick is we planted in September, but if you think about it, it's not a tick.
No, it's not.
The other way around. So I have a question, and then Diana has a better question. My question is, we planted in September, which, as you can imagine, is the opposite of what you just said is a good time to plant. We're starting to see the winter lull, and it's really early. This is the point of the church where it's supposed to be kicking off. And people are just like, oh, it's raining. Maybe I shouldn't come to church today. And you're like, that's not a good reason not to come to church. Is there, we've had ideas of hey, should we do it like a relaunch? It's still early. We can just do hey, we're celebrating 6 months of being a church and let's invite everyone, try to get it pumped up. Have you seen things in the past that have worked when someone has planted not at the ideal time?
We've launched a couple of churches same time as you guys. Generally, though, what we've done is deliberately launched in that sort of September, October, heading into fourth term, picked up on the move towards Christmas. As we've headed into the start of the school year, fall America, we've relaunched. So the reason we've done that is because when you launch a church, no one knows you've done it except for the people who know, which means when you come to a new part of the year and you say, come to our church, and you treat it, you don't say, like we're just starting a church, but if you do various things to attract people at that time of the year, the people you connect with don't know. And you're still young, and so you can have a double launch, and that's what we've tended to do. The other thing I'd say is that I'm quite keen on churches to think about capitalising on events. So again, our experience is, launch strong. We try and launch as big as possible, and know that actually that actually helps with your starter size in a strange sort of way. So, we do that deliberately. And then I think events in the church life capitalise. The classics are Easter and Christmas, but you can insert, we always have plant birthdays. We unashamedly say, we've been here 12 months, we've been here 2 years. We just keep doing that because it's good to celebrate the aware of people. We try and, we're comfortable about picking up on Mother's Day or Father's Day or events that are occurring in the life of your community as invitational sort of moments, and I think they're good. They're good to do. Yeah.
I would just say yes, absolutely. Yeah, we have a skill in America of declaring that our strategy was whatever happened. So, what we would call that for you is the first one was just a soft launch.
Yeah.
We were developing our leaders, and now our grand opening is So, I think launching is a skill, and get better at it till you get it right. Yep. No shame. Yep.
I'm Diana. I'm with Jade at Grace City. I'm interested to hear about the governing model, like your governing structure, which it has evolved at Trinity. it sounds like it was more reactive, like finding a solution to a problem as you faced it. So now you've walked that journey, looking back, do you think there is a different way of setting it up earlier by foreseeing growth? And how did you find that change in governing structure? Did you lose staff? Did you lose people who are, like, how did you manage that change? Was it a difficult change when the governing structure changed?
The only people who probably were affected by those change in governance steps were the senior pastors of the churches. So there was a level at which when we adjusted, but the first adjustment you saw was Mother Church running other churches. When we moved to a one, we're all in this together space, of course all the churches and the Mother Church was comfortable. This was a happy place for us to be in. It also helped them understand why we were doing it more clearly. We're doing this together to reach more people and plant more churches. So the clarity on that was there, and I think that helped. The skill is to try and, I think you're probably right, I think I was reacting. I saw the diagram with me as the choke point and thought, we should do something about that. So there was a level of reaction, but what we were trying to do was to stay in front of the curve if we could. So not wait until we'd hit a wall and it was, we better think of something, but try and get slightly in front of that curve, driven by both vision of what we're trying to do and then common sense, because it's only wisdom governance, in terms of how we wanted to run together as a group of churches with that sort of purpose in mind and steering in front of that. So I don't think we lost anyone. I think our pattern has been long-standing staff over a long period of time, and most of our pastors, we work through that together. I don't jump out of bed and say, guess what, and it sort of gets, we want to talk it through together because they're a wise group of people who have a lot to contribute in that space. So I think working it through, but the key thing is with those governance things, trying to work out how to facilitate growth at the coalface. And for us to do that together effectively, but it's all to do with the making of disciples, really, and therefore making sure we don't govern in such a way that we stop that happening, but actually facilitate it. That's the driving principle. It's the way we operate with network resources. How do we pump network resources into the front line to free up people to do gospel ministry? That's the thing we're trying to do. The board doesn't control, it facilitates gospel growth. It does that by providing helpful policy and procedures and stuff like that, but its aim is to help the gospel go out. And that's because we're driven by that concern for planting and reaching people that binds the board together. So we don't get caught on, we want to make sure that we have, appropriate, governance and compliance stuff. We don't want that to drive us. We want gospel things to drive. So we keep trying to do that together.
Chris Braga from Grace Western Sydney. Wade, imagine you inherit a launched multi-site, didn't necessarily have the right leader or the right model. You're now done a belly flop, you're red on the belly, you look back and there's no diving board to have another go from. Any advice on managing kind of change from there?
Yeah. You said for me to imagine that. Are you imagining that too? Or just hypothetical. Okay, yeah. What I see with leaders who dive into any of these models, the parachute church planting or multi-site, and it doesn't just not go well, but it becomes painful, is there's a reset needed, and usually that's like 3 years. That's for the leader. I don't think it necessarily takes that long for the organization, especially as you've gotten credibility built up over the years that we can do this. If one doesn't go well, it doesn't have the same impact on the organization. You can just sort of do what we said earlier. You just say, well, we meant to learn from that one, and now we're going to do better. And that one's a pretty quick reload. But I would say for the leader, be very, very slow to jump back in after a belly flop, because you can find yourself operating out of desire to not experience pain again, because those things can be really, really hard, rather than out of a desire to take the risks you need to do any of this well in the first place. So that's the way I would encourage you to think about it. You can reload quickly as an organization or as a church, but as a leader, take your time. These things can be really painful. A lot of Derek and Scott's ministry when I first met with them was, we talked earlier about Mark Driscoll coming and people getting motivated and jumping all in. There was a real pastoring ministry to young guys who had jumped into that, and it didn't become what they thought it would. And so I'm very, very sensitive to that for leaders.
Yep. No, I just agree with that. I think you do need to. The cost of plants failing is both a leadership cost and a people cost. So the people who've been on plants that have failed, it's a pejorative term, but not continued on, so that the percentage that stopped, that has a cost on those people that went. And I encounter those people pretty regularly, I think. And it's the same for the leaders as well. So rethinking, caring for the people properly, resetting is a good thing to do.
I'll just read a question from someone, and I'll just make a quick comment afterwards, then I'll throw to you. So the question is, any wisdom or suggestions for a staff team seeking to run the M-purpose model across 3 separate congregations at different times across 3 different locations, all staff responsible for different M's across all? I'll just make a quick thing, and if you've got a pen at some point as well.
I'm just giving my degree of difficulty to the diagram they're tackling there, yeah.
For a future thing, someone wants you to draw Scott's diagram at some point as well. Just on that, can I say, at Reach Australia, no one should, from the platform, will hopefully be talking about M's. No one will be talking about M's. Thank God. Thank God. We want to talk about what it looks like to build a mature disciple. M's for us are sure, they're a way of talking historically, but we want to talk about what does it look like to build a mature disciple? What are the outcomes we're looking for? Sorry, there's my just quick caveat. Okay, no problem with the question, but just say, if we're hearing M's from the front, we don't want to lead with that. We want to lead with mature disciples. So 3 locations with M's, staff team wisdom.
Paul actually did it, so I would defer to you.
Yeah, I'm not sure we have really, but the thought I'd have is if I pull that back and said 3 congregations, 1 location, M's, can you do that with that team? I think you can, actually. I think that's certainly possible. So can you do it across 3 locations, same staff team but different times? And again, I'd say, yeah, I think you can. Okay. What tends to happen though is that this is my guess, because I don't think we've done this. So my guess is that the staff involved will find it hard to bring that level of attention to those 3 locations. So probably the people who are doing those roles need to be very skilled to manage that complexity and to build the level of teams and infrastructure associated with it. So person who does M in 1 location, 1 congregation, you get that, okay. Yeah. 2, whoa, I'm stretching a bit further. 3, oh, I'm stretching further. Now, some people can do that. Some people have the capacity to achieve that, but I don't think everyone can. So it's a difference. The question I was going to push in with Wade was, when you think about multi-site or church planting, is it easy to find more multi-site pastors than church planters? I think it is.
I do too.
So because I think it's more possible. You're doing the M's across multiple. You add extra locations, you reduce your percentage of people who can do that job. It goes downhill. So 3 locations, average M pastor. 3 locations, maybe 10% of your M pastors can do it. Add 4, goes down again. I think it's that sort of issue that you're wrestling with. To get all purpose pastors able to do it would be unusual again. So you'd have some people just hitting a wall at 2, and you'd wonder why they weren't doing such a good job in the 3rd one. It's just a big ask, I think. Yeah, that's my thought, but yeah.
I would agree. Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. Whether it's M's or anything else, I think That's why I wrote 9.7. You start adding in, extra times, extra distance, same people, same strategy. You're stretching those people and strategies. And that's what Paul's been so good at, is adjusting those things to keep moving forward and keep being willing to adjust even things like governance in order for the gospel to continue going forward. I think we're about to wrap up. All Scott had asked me to draw earlier was a prototypical American city. So that's what this is. No city looks like this. There's beaches that, keep this from being a circle, or mountains. Well, maybe in Kansas it looks like this. It's just flat. But if you imagine a north-south road and an east-west road and a loop around the city, in a city of fairly large population, and especially in the Bible Belt, this is where you'll find megachurches. Is out kind of not all the way in the country. So out in the country is small country churches, and all the way in is small inner city churches. And that's kind of what we see in our context. But on this suburban ring, that's where you'd expect to find a megachurch. And if you look at the demographics of that area, they'll be very identifiable. You might have separate ways that you can do this too. There are companies in America that spend billions of dollars on demographic research, and then they go into certain areas. And so we cheat. We just look to see where they ended up. And so where we find Target or Chick-fil-A, we find one of those. And if that church wants to look for a place to launch strong, similarly demographically. Now again, guys, I'm not getting into values of whether this is a good thing or not a good thing. I'm just saying it is a thing. That this model will work really, really well if you can find something 20 minutes away that also has a Target and a Chick-fil-A, but that is unreached from a church standpoint. The actual point I want to make here, and Heath, this gets a little bit to what you were asking earlier about an evening congregation trying to reach different groups of people. Multisite works best when you're reproducing something you do really, really well. And don't be ashamed about that. Like if you're really, really good at reaching a certain population of people, and that population of people happens to also be present 20 minutes away, then you've got a lower complication dive, and that's like a bird on the ground. Y'all with me? Especially for your first one. That's a great, great thing. But we're not excused from reaching out to everyone around us too. It's all nations that are part of the Great Commission. So we want to include that. I think we're getting close to wrapping up, Derek, or?
Yeah, I think we are, sorry. Look, I just want to give great thanks for these two men.
Well, that was Wade Burnett, and I hope that's got you thinking of the possibilities of multiplication in your particular scenario. If you would like to know more, make sure you jump onto our website, look for the church planting tab, and take advantage of everything that's there. But be in contact. We would love to help you. I'm Pete Hughes. Chat soon.